How's it going, people? Welcome back to United View and welcome back to the Tactical View after a big away game where, for the first time in what feels like a century, we're not reporting on a demolition job against Manchester United. Thankfully, Erik ten Hag saw sense and decided to change the system, be a lot more compact, and Manchester United were able to frustrate Liverpool into a 0-0 draw in which, to be honest, Manchester United actually had the better chances in open play. So, Charlie, pleasure to have you alongside me again, and well, let's get straight into it. What were you so happy about with this game? And was it good to finally see Erik ten Hag change things up just a little bit?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on again. Nice to report on a good result. I think the most pleasing thing, I think we all probably knew with the Bruno suspension, we probably knew that it was going to be that sort of midfield three, or at least we were going to have Kobe and Amrabat in there. So I think starting those two together in more of a pivot rather than sort of this staggered 4-3-3 or using these 2-8s that we've seen a lot this season was very, very pleasing. Bringing Rafael Varane back in as well. And funnily enough, starting him at left centre-back for 2 games in a row, which kind of dispels all these myths about passing angles. But I thought, even on the ball, I think Varane's probably our most two-footed defender anyway. I think he's really good with his left foot. So I thought Varane came in, was my man of the match defensively and also on the ball. Wasn't too bad as well. So I think those were the 2 key changes personnel wise, sort of bringing Kobe and Varane in. And then in terms of the shape, out of possession, very much sort of a solid 4-4-2 a lot of the time. A solid base of 4. Sometimes McTominay was sort of the 10. Sometimes he was just playing off Højlund. Sometimes he was joining Højlund out of possession. But the most important things were those 2 banks of 4 that were very, very tightly together, because we've seen in a lot of recent games Manchester United's midfield and defensive lines being too far apart out of possession. And the same with the forward and midfield lines. There's been so much space. And in this game in particular, I was really happy to see a lot more compact out of possession. Our 2 midfield players not too bothered with the man-to-man this time. We've seen a lot of away games against the big teams where we've been religiously following other midfield players around the pitch, playing a very tight man-to-man press. But this time, Kobe and Amrabat, at times they were following Gravenberch and Szoboszlai and Endo around, McTominay as well, following Endo around a lot of the time. But in the second half in particular, I thought it was a lot more zonal. Players were just respecting their space, as we talked about last week, the sort of negatives that a man-to-man press can have, where you're being dragged out of position a lot. And I think Szoboszlai did do that to Amrabat a few times, and I think he struggled. But I think in the majority of the time, we stayed very compact. We cleared a lot of things out in and around the 18-yard area. And I mean, I don't know what you thought of our 2 centre-backs. I thought particularly Varane just showed why he is still our best defender in there with his magnificent box defending.
Absolutely. I think as you mentioned there, the key points really from Erik ten Hag were to try and make the team much more compact, reduce those gaps between the lines. And really, it was a game plan all about parking the bus, essentially, and frustrating Liverpool to restrict them to as few chances as we possibly could. But that's the tactical level. You still need really good individual performances to actually execute it. And as you mentioned, Rafael Varane was fantastic, as was Kobe Mainoo as well. And a number of other fantastic performances. Diogo Dalot was pretty good. I think Luke Shaw was fantastic as well. And Andre Onana had a great game. So I think you can set up the tactical game plan however you want, but it also relies on fantastic individual execution. Players have to turn up and play well. And then beyond that, also, we relied a little bit on Liverpool not being at their best. And I think whilst United did play well and do well to frustrate them, I think Liverpool absolutely, if they were at their sort of highest gear, they probably would have scored in that game. But I think Klopp's tactics, particularly inverting Trent, didn't really help in terms of them having the width and the quality of delivery to unpick United's defensive block. But I think overall, you've got to give Erik ten Hag a lot of credit for the way he set the team up. Now, with the midfield balance that you mentioned there, in terms of Amrabat and Kobe Mainoo being more of a double pivot than the sort of 1 sitting behind 2 that we've seen previously, I think it was absolutely crucial, as you mentioned, that in terms of their zonal job, rather than going out to press forwards when Liverpool midfielders maybe dropped off a little bit deeper, their job for pretty much the entire game was sit 10 yards in front of your centre-backs and don't move. And it sounds really simple. It sounds really, well, defensive, and I suppose it is. But that was really crucial. The organisation and the relationships between players was a really, really important side of United's game plan here. And particularly in the 4-4-2, the reason that so many teams, and pretty much all the top teams are doing it now, using the 4-4-2 out of possession, the reason that it's so popular is that it's very, very easy for the players to know where each other should be in relation to their teammates, and it's very easy to form the relationship. So you saw all over the pitch, you've got those really strong links between players going on. So examples of that would be Alejandro Garnacho and Luke Shaw. So at times, Salah would drag Shaw inside, and maybe Trent would get on down the line, or Soboslai would come wide, and Garnacho would then be in a position where he's going out to press the ball. And other times, maybe Salah would be much wider, and Shaw would then have to come wider as a result. And in the right moments, Amrabat or Kobe Mainoo were dropping into that gap between the centre back and the full back to fill it, and Garnacho would tuck into midfield there. So I think the rotations, sort of defensively, and the way that the players were able to organise on the pitch and deal with those situations as they arose was crucial, because in recent weeks for United, it's been far too slow to recognise situations, to move into the right positions, and to deal with the problems as they occur. But for me, against Liverpool, it's one of the things that United did actually do really, really well. Now, in terms of this midfield balance, you mentioned the man-to-man marking. You mentioned obviously playing a little bit more zonal in this game compared to what we've done in previous weeks. Now, it's interesting you say that. So for me, I think, yes, we were very much, in general, more zonal, trying to sit in that 4-4-2 and protect spaces. But one thing I did notice was that when the ball was going to one side for Liverpool, let's say Van Dijk's on the ball here, there was always a concerted effort as well, by the way, for Højlund to try and get close to Van Dijk and to sort of sit off Konate a little bit to try and force them to progress through Konate, which I thought was a nice detail to the game plan. But what I liked from the midfield balance here was that we recognise that, yes, Liverpool can set up a positional structure and occupy all the sort of 5 lanes of the pitch, all the 5 channels, as much as they want to. But the reality is there's only one ball on the pitch. So as long as you defend the ball first and foremost, you should be okay, unless they're able to move it that quickly, which in this case they weren't. So the effort from United was, rather than staying man-to-man here, when the ball was with Van Dijk, for example, or Tsimikas, you'd have Kobe Mainoo following the 8 on the near side, and then Amrabat would simply cover the space in between, with Garnacho shifting across nicely as well. So that was the departure from the usual system, the usual tactics that United play, where maybe Amrabat wouldn't have gone quite so far over. And that was the key bit for United in terms of making sure that those central areas were blocked really, really well. So that if Liverpool did manage to move the ball inside the United block, anywhere inside that 4-4-2 shape, there was a United player on top of that Liverpool player as soon as they took their first touch, which was absolutely crucial for the way that United wanted to play.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's important to draw a parallel. I think we talked about it on the last show, from last year's performance against Liverpool and this year's performance, or last time in March when we lost 7-0. And I think Liverpool probably expected Manchester United to come to Anfield and maybe deploy the same sort of man-to-man pressing midfield that we had before. And I think they did really, really well at manipulating that and getting around that. And I was a little bit worried that the same would have happened yesterday. But I was glad to see Erik ten Hag change it. I think away at Newcastle as well, we saw Newcastle exploit the man-to-man press. So it's finally, we have to say it's taken him too long to do it, but he has finally adapted, which is absolutely crucial. And I just, one worry I do have though, Cameron, I don't know whether you see eye to eye with me on this. It's interesting. Obviously, we had no Rashford and no Bruno yesterday. I don't think either Rashford or Bruno could have performed any of the roles that midfield forward did in the same way. So if you're looking at maybe how to look at this model when those two come back, it's going to be interesting to see how it changes, because I would hope that Garnacho has to keep his place for me, because of I think he could have done better on the chance he had. And I think if that was Rashford, that's perhaps a goal, because I think Rashford's a little bit stronger up against Alexander-Arnold. But the defensive side of things, I think Rashford switches off a lot more often than Garnacho does. So I don't think Rashford could take Garnacho's place. And then if you're looking at sort of the forward players, you could probably bring Bruno in for McTominay. I think we were talking about that earlier. But I would like to see Erik ten Hag reward these players who stuck to the game plan, who did very, very well out of possession. And in possession as well, there were some nice bits and bobs. Not a great deal to take from it, but I thought in possession there was a lovely move from McTominay and Cobby, and McTominay was involved in a couple of great moves with Højlund's chance, and I'm sure we'll touch on that when we touch the in-possession stuff. But I just hope that Erik ten Hag obviously rewards these players, and I hope he doesn't realise that this is just a one-off game where we've got to be solid against Liverpool. We look at the games we're coming up against: West Ham away and Villa at home. they are going to be games where we're going to have to be extremely solid as well. And I don't know what you think about sort of going forward, how we're going to maybe look to adapt this. But I sincerely hope that we actually stick to this structure, at least for the next couple of games, because West Ham away and Villa at home are games where you've got to respect their sort of in possession qualities.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think the key point, as you mentioned, the difference between the 7-0 game and this game really is that the game plan was a lot more conservative from Ten Hag, and it sort of took into account Liverpool's biggest threat, which is attacking space. What they've got in that team is a lot of athletic players, a lot of great runners, ball carriers, players that want to attack space. So the first idea from Ten Hag was kill the space behind the defence. Second idea was kill the space in front of the defence, and everything else basically comes after that. And obviously that results in quite a deep line and the midfield basically playing 5 or 10 yards in front of that defensive line. And it was really, really important, as you say, that we stuck to our task well. And I think the inclusion of Scott McTominay was interesting, and he's one of those players that you really do need to have in your team for these sorts of games because he's a duel winner. His quality on the ball isn't really the best. I think there's a lot of situations where he could have done better. Amrabat likewise. But in terms of winning the duels and giving you that physical platform, that's McTominay's strength, and that's why he's in that team. I thought, to be perfectly honest with you, I thought Sofian Amrabat was absolutely horrendous in possession. He had an absolute stinker. Pretty much every time he touched the ball, whether it was passing into feet, he normally passed it out of play or nowhere near the player he's passing to, or even if he's just guiding the ball into an area, he somehow managed to make a complete mess of it. And he just seems very heavy on his feet. He doesn't seem like he's cut out for the intensity of a high-pressing Premier League game against a big top side in Liverpool. So I think Amrabat disappointed me, but the thing that he did well was being a defensive midfield player. He was in the right place, and that was absolutely crucial. I think had it been maybe Scott McTominay there or Fred there in recent seasons, they would have left a lot of gaps and got attracted to the ball at inopportune moments. But I think what Amrabat did do well was that he was in the right place, and positionally that was so, so important. I think the one thing I want to touch on before we go on to the in possession stuff actually is the role of Luke Shaw in this left back area here. Now, I think obviously he's played at centre back recently, and I think that has helped him in terms of when he defends the box. I've noticed now, I think he seemed to be much more confident of when to sort of play the ball long, when to clear it, when to get rid, and when to sort of try and play out. And I think that was a useful factor and a useful thing for United to have, particularly against someone like Mo Salah that is really at his best when he is inside the box. So that was helpful as well. In terms of whether this works as a shape going forward, I think the one thing I do want to see is that in moments of games where things are getting difficult, just get back into this shape. Doesn't matter what we're trying to do, what the game plan is, whether we want to press, whether it's a weaker team, a stronger team, doesn't matter. I think one of the things that Arsenal and Manchester City are doing really well in recent seasons is when they're having a difficult moment in the game, they get 11 players behind the ball really, really quickly. And the only times that United looked vulnerable in this game for me were those moments when we got attracted into a bit of a high press and with 2 or 3 passes, Liverpool broke it. And then whilst United were getting back into shape, those were the moments where United could have been vulnerable. So for me, it's avoiding those moments by making sure that you get back into shape as quick as you can. And at the first hint of difficulty in a game, get back, be solid for 5 minutes, then try and play your way back into the game. So for me, that's where I see things going. I hope we stick to this shape in due course. And I think in possession as well, there were some interesting things that I wanted to touch on. So in terms of United's shape, you can see obviously the back four. So when we sort of started with goal kicks, you have Varane and Johnny Evans fairly deep. Obviously, Onana there as well. Typically, Varane passing the ball to Onana. You had Diogo Dalot here, interestingly, sort of inverting into midfield with Kobbie Mainoo sort of going out to the right wing to try and play basically in behind Luis Diaz. Now, a quote I wanted to draw your attention to from Andre Onana after the game was this. He said, I have to see if one centre-back from their team goes to my midfielder, so I have to recognise the situation as soon as possible. There's many things I have to try to scan before they give me the ball. It is not easy with high pressure from Salah, for example. So for me, the bit that was really speaking about was the importance of, yes, when we're playing short, we do it to try and sort of play through to an extent. But really what that speaks to for me is the philosophy of Eric Ten Hag, where actually he's going short, but the real bit of focus he's got is this space here. Because he knows that obviously Liverpool are a very high-pressing team. As soon as that ball's touched, Salah and Nunez are going to get attracted towards this United back three there. Szoboszlai is going to step onto Amrabat. Gravenberch will step onto Dalot. And Kobbie Mainoo here gives Luis Diaz a problem. Usually Diaz will try and push up to try and keep that 4-4-2 press from Liverpool intact. But the real bit of interest here as Trent steps up as well is what's going on behind, because obviously United have got a 4v4 in that situation. Now, if Endo, who's playing as a centre back essentially in that situation, if he comes up with McTominay here, then the play might be to try and find Højlund or try and find one of the wingers, making a nice run in behind the wider players there, Kanate and Tsimikas. But if Endo opts to sit deep and sort of have that extra player, that +1 for Liverpool in the back line, what Onana's looking for there is, can he play a ball through the lines himself using his passing ability into Scott McTominay and take 6 Liverpool players out of the game? So I thought that was a really interesting detail. And I know you had some stuff you wanted to say about the role of Diogo Dalot second half as well.
Yeah, really, really good points there. Really, really good points. I just thought in the second half we managed to find Dallo that little bit more, and I think in that sort of inverted role. And I think when you're playing away at Anfield, as the game goes on, you start to get a little bit more confidence. You know, the first 5 minutes was tough. I think we were all the United fans were sort of watching behind the sofa in the first 5 minutes when all those corners we were like, oh, we can't concede. But you know, when it got to half time, when it got to about 65, 70 minutes, I actually tweeted, I said, we've got a chance here to win this game. And I feel like when you're away at Anfield, I think the crowd was very subdued. We were starting to grow in confidence a little bit. And how do you grow in confidence more at Anfield? Well, you start to play. You start to play. You start to play out. You start to get in a little bit of confidence. And I think we started to do that. And I think Dallo was a key reason for that, because I thought in the second half, in build-up, we managed to find Dallo in that little sort of right half space area. And he picked out a really few nice passes into McTominay, into wider areas. And I think we've seen a lot. We saw a lot last season. Eric Ten Hag, now and again, he uses an inverted fullback, but it's not all the time. It's not all the time, because we know he wants that numerical superiority in the final third. So we know from his Ajax days he had very specialist players in build-up, and he could rely on those specialists. Sort of normally it was a 3-1 shape with the goalkeeper, so he can rely on those specialist 5 players to beat any press. They were so good. Daley Blind, Mazraoui, Martinez, Timber. These players were so good. They're so good technically that they could beat many presses, and then they could enjoy the numerical superiority in the final third. And I think United in recent weeks, because of the lack of personnel, have struggled to get sort of through that press and to enjoy those benefits in the final third. So I think, what do you do if you maybe haven't got the personnel, or whether if you're playing a really good high pressing side, you bring a fullback inside a little bit, you try and generate a bit more superiority in your own first phase, in the second phase, so then you can enjoy the rewards in the final third. And I just thought Dallo was really good. Defensively, he was brilliant, but I thought in possession, certainly in the last 20 or 30 minutes, we started to play through him a bit more, and we started to get chances. So yeah, that was just my point on Dallo. I don't know whether you agree with that, but I was pleased to see that little, just getting the most out of him in the second half. I thought in the first half we didn't quite use him enough.
Absolutely. So I thought I saw him inverting from early on, but we very rarely played through into this area, into Amrabat and Dallo in the first half. But as you mentioned, I thought Dallo had a couple of really nice ball carries where he's received the ball in the half turn in this sort of area, turned on it and driven forwards. Unfortunately, it was one of them in particular was particularly typical Dallo, where he made a really nice carry, really nice turn, and then messes up the final ball at the end to try and find Scott McTominay. But it was really encouraging. And I think, just to finish off, in terms of why Dallo was in that role, this is something I'm struggling to put my finger on. So obviously Kobbie Mainoo is great in those areas in terms of scanning, in terms of how he receives the ball. I can't quite put my finger on exactly why it was that it was decided that Dallo would be better in that area. Now, I liked the way he took the ball in the half turn. That was obviously a great attribute to have and really important for that role. I think also his physicality is important in the way he carries the ball, because it gives us a little bit more chance of breaking through the lines and being explosive. But at the same time, I can't help but thinking Kobbie Mainoo probably can do that. I think the only bit he doesn't have of that is maybe the explosive carrying. The only thing I can think of is that if we did lose the ball and if it goes wrong, Dallow's probably a little bit better placed and a little bit more experienced in terms of recovering, particularly when obviously Mainoo then got himself booked. So that's, I don't know if you get any other ideas on why that's happened.
No, I thought maybe it was to sort of just, if you do something maybe a little bit that the opposition's maybe not expecting, you can maybe drag Gravenberch out of that area, and cause a little bit of confusion between Gravenberch and Diaz. Who's picking up who. That kind of situation. That's maybe why I thought that happened. Just because, and I think we got a little bit of joy. There was one pass in the first half. I think it was from Anana, who found Kobbie Mainoo. just on the halfway line, and his first touch was unbelievable. I don't know whether you saw that. And he turned really, really well. So no, I just think maybe it's to cause a little bit of disruption for, who we didn't expect that. Or who are you going to pick up, just maybe to disrupt things a little bit, rotate a little bit. We know Erik ten Hag loves those rotations in build up, although they get there's a bit too many sometimes that the players can't quite perform them. But and I also think, Cam, I think we've actually seen Cobby play a lot as a six this season. But I think I actually think his best position is a number 8. And I actually think his final pass, you'll see soon hopefully when he starts to play further forward, his final pass and his way to pass, his choice of pass in and around the final third is really, really good. So that's maybe another reason why, just to push Cobby a bit further forward, because I think he does have that good eye for a pass in building attacks. And I think hopefully everyone watching this right now, we're going to see more of Cobby in advanced areas.
Absolutely, and you saw that pass for Garnacho for that chance. Absolutely incredible. Anyway, it's been a pleasure of a tactical view. Nice to have a positive one after a big game for once. Thank you so much for joining me, Charlie, and we will see you again very soon on the Peace.